They closed it with a sign. Guests arrived one morning in September 1994, found a maintenance notice on one of the most popular rides in the park, shrugged, and rode something else. Standard Disney stuff. Nobody panicked, nobody demanded answers. The ride would be back. It was always back. Except this time, it never came back. And Disney let 2 full years pass before they admitted that to anyone. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea opened at the Magic Kingdom on October 14, 1971, 2 weeks after the park itself opened. 12 submarines, a nearly 12 million gallon lagoon that consumed almost a quarter of Fantasyland's entire footprint. When the Walt Disney World and Disneyland submarine fleets were counted together, Disney had the 5th largest naval fleet in the world. Not the 5th largest theme park fleet, the 5th largest naval fleet on the entire planet. Disney owned more submarines than most sovereign nations. That is not an exaggeration. That is just the fact of what existed in Central Florida for 23 years. Guests boarded Nautilus-style vessels designed by Harper Goff, a man whose aesthetic sensibility fused Victorian engineering with something that felt genuinely otherworldly. Goff had previously done production design on the 1954 Disney film that the ride was based on, and his fingerprints were all over the submarines themselves. Riveted steel hulls, brass fittings, porthole windows thick enough to make you feel like you were genuinely descending into something dangerous. The vessels looked like they had been salvaged from a Jules Verne novel rather than manufactured in a California fabrication shop. Guests walked the dock, descended a short staircase into the cabin, and took their seats along the hull facing the portholes. Then the submarine pulled away from the dock, the water rose around the windows, and for the next several minutes, you were underwater. You traveled through coral reefs rendered in extraordinary detail for the era, through dark underwater caverns where the darkness felt genuine and the sounds changed in a way your nervous system registered before your brain did, past polar ice caps with convincing frozen geometries pressing down from above, through the lost city of Atlantis, columns and archways half buried in silt, the suggestion of a civilization swallowed whole. And then, near the end, a giant squid attacked the submarine. Tentacles across the porthole, the sub shuddering, the crew reacting. And then it was over, and you surfaced and got off the boat and walked back out into the Florida sun, and for a few minutes, the world felt slightly different than it had before you got on. That was the point. That was always the point. When you were a kid in the 1970s or 1980s and someone told you Disney had an actual working submarine that sent you through the actual ocean floor, you believed it completely. The ride was engineered to make you believe it. The porthole created a frame. The frame created a picture. The picture was the ocean, and the ocean was real, and you were inside it. The fact that you were in a controlled lagoon in Central Florida with painted fiberglass coral and mechanical squid was information your brain had access to, but chose not to prioritize. That is what Disney was selling. That is what Disney had always been selling. And with 20,000 Leagues, they had built one of the most effective delivery mechanisms for that feeling that the company had ever produced. It ran for 23 years. The lines on hot Florida afternoons were some of the longest in Fantasyland. Families planned their day around it. Kids who rode it as children brought their own children back to ride it. It was an e-ticket attraction from the beginning, and it never stopped being one. Whatever metrics Disney was using to measure guest satisfaction, this ride was performing on them. The people who went to the Magic Kingdom in the 1970s and 1980s and early 1990s did not stop loving 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. They kept showing up for it, right until the day the maintenance sign appeared. Here is the part of the story that is less romantic. The ride was the single most expensive attraction in the park to operate. 20 employees per shift just to run the loading and unloading process. The submarine's hydraulic systems required constant specialized attention, the kind that could not be handled by general maintenance staff. It needed people who understood the specific mechanical language of these specific vessels, and those people had to be there every single operating day. The lagoon itself was a 12 million gallon maintenance problem. Keeping that volume of water clear enough for guests to see meaningfully through the portholes was a full-time operation in its own right, involving filtration systems and chemical treatment and monitoring that never stopped. And then there was the paint. Every single year, the entire lagoon had to be drained and allowed to dry completely. Then crews went down into it and repainted every piece of fake coral, every plastic sea creature, every surface that guests' eyes would pass over through those portholes. The Florida sun bleached everything. The ultraviolet exposure at that latitude was relentless, and it did not care what anything had cost to fabricate. Within months of repainting, the colors had already started fading back toward white. So, the drain and repaint cycle repeated, every year, indefinitely, for as long as the ride existed. That was not a problem Disney had solved. That was a cost Disney had accepted. And for 23 years, they kept accepting it because the ride was worth it. Then the spreadsheets changed. The submarines were not handicap accessible, which was becoming an increasingly significant operational and liability consideration. The loading process was slow by the standards of what the park's major attractions needed to achieve. Pirates of the Caribbean could move thousands of guests per hour. Haunted Mansion could move thousands of guests per hour. The submarine loading process, with its staircase descent and fixed seating and careful boarding choreography, could not come close to that throughput. The line got long and stayed long, and the number of people actually cycling through it per hour was not proportional to the footprint the attraction occupied. 4 acres of prime Fantasyland real estate, 12 million gallons of water, 20 employees per shift, and a guest capacity that by the park's own internal metrics was not keeping pace with the investment. Euro Disneyland had opened in 1992, and it had been, to use the financial press's language of the time, a catastrophe. The Paris park had been built on assumptions that did not survive contact with European consumer behavior, European labor law, and a European recession that nobody had adequately modeled. The losses were severe enough to threaten the broader company. Michael Eisner responded the way executives respond to existential financial pressure. He ordered the parks to cut costs, deep cuts, structural cuts, the kind that do not come back. Every attraction in every park got evaluated not just on guest satisfaction, but on cost per guest, operational complexity, maintenance load, and return on footprint. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea failed that evaluation on almost every metric. It was beloved, and it was a financial anchor, and those two things were both true simultaneously. Something had to go. 20,000 Leagues was one of the first rides onto the chopping block. They just did not tell anyone that. September 5th, 1994. Guests arrived and found the standard maintenance sign. The story Disney gave employees that fall was that the ride was going down for the most comprehensive refurbishment in its history. A complete top-to-bottom overhaul timed to Walt Disney World's 25th anniversary in 1996. It was going to come back better than ever, more impressive, updated. The wait would be worth it. That was the story. Some employees believed it, some did not. But that was the story that circulated, and in the absence of any official contradiction, it was the story that guests heard when they asked why the lagoon was quiet. The submarines sat in the water going nowhere. Guests walking through Fantasyland could see them from the paths, just sitting there, empty, still. A ghost fleet in the middle of the most cheerful real estate on Earth. The props and the coral were still down in the lagoon, decaying in the water while Disney worked out what it was going to say and when it was going to say it. For 2 years that went on. 2 full years of the submarines just being there, visible, motionless, not explained. In April 1996, Disney officially made the closure permanent. The announcement was quiet. There was no ceremony marking the end of something that had operated for 23 years. There was no final ride, no last call, no acknowledgement that anything significant was ending. The maintenance sign had become permanent, and now it was official, and that was that. People who had been waiting for the reopening that had been quietly promised found out the same way everyone else did, through a brief announcement that contained none of the emotional weight the situation actually warranted. In 2004, 10 years after the ride closed, Disney finally drained the lagoon for the last time and began filling it in. The submarines were removed, the coral and the props were pulled out. The 12 million gallon hole in Fantasyland was converted to solid ground. When workers drained it, they found the coins, 2 decades worth of them, pennies and nickels and quarters that guests had tossed from the boats over 23 years of operation. Every coin, a wish made by someone sitting in a porthole seat, watching the ocean scroll past, wanting to hold on to something, wanting to extend the feeling by one more small ritual. Some of those coins had been sitting in that water for over 20 years when the drain finally reached them. Every single one of them had been thrown in before anyone knew the ride was already being planned out of existence. The 4 acres got rebuilt, then rebuilt again, then rebuilt a 3rd time. Ariel's Grotto came first, a walk-through meet-and-greet area that occupied part of the former lagoon space. It lasted until 2008. Pooh's Playful Spot replaced it, a small play area for young children. It lasted until 2010. Then the current occupants arrived. Seven Dwarfs Mine Train sits in the footprint now, along with Journey of the Little Mermaid. Both are legitimate, well-executed attractions. Seven Dwarfs Mine Train in particular has become one of the most popular rides in the park. Long waits, strong reviews, real affection from guests who have no memory of what used to be there. But here is what is worth sitting with. The Submarines outlasted 2 of their 3 replacements. Ariel's Grotto is gone. Pooh's Playful Spot is gone. The ride that Disney considered too expensive and too obsolete to continue operating in 1994 has a longer legacy than 2 of the things that replaced it. And the third replacement, the one currently sitting on that ground, generates lines and strong reviews and genuine guest enthusiasm. But it does not generate the specific quality of memory that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea generates in the people who rode it. There is something particular about what that ride did to people. The porthole experience created an intimacy that most theme park attractions do not achieve. You were not watching something happen in front of you. You were inside something happening around you. The window framed the world, and the world was underwater, and your nervous system processed that as real in a way that was different from a screen or a stage set. Adults who wrote it as children in the 1970s can describe specific moments with a clarity that is unusual for any memory that old. The color of the coral, the specific quality of the darkness in the cavern sequence, the moment the squid appeared, and the way the subs seemed to respond to it. These are not vague impressions. They are specific, stored at a different depth than ordinary memories get stored. That is what Disney shut down with a maintenance sign and no warning and 2 years of quiet before admitting it was permanent. Not just an attraction, a specific quality of experience that the company has never quite replicated on that site or anywhere else in quite the same way. The closest Disney ever came was the Finding Nemo submarine voyage at Disneyland, which reopened the Tomorrowland Submarine Lagoon in 2007 using the original boats with updated theming. It runs today, it produces affection, but the people who rode 20,000 Leagues will tell you it is not the same thing, and the specificity with which they describe what made the original different suggests they are not simply being nostalgic. They are describing something real that existed and does not anymore. Disney killed 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea because a spreadsheet said it was too expensive to justify. The guests disagreed. They just did not get a vote. Drop what year you last wrote it in the comments. Subscribe because we cover what gets closed and why it still matters.